like to give the floor to Mary Wisz. She's a professor at the World Maritime University and also the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute. Her research focuses on the understand and forecast of how marine social-ecological systems respond to climate change and other Anthropocene changes in space and time to inform management decisions. She has worked in a range of projects. She's also working in Mission Atlantic, but I think in the context of the talk today, she will mainly focus on the ocean twilling zone and how actually uncertainty, decision-making, and governance actually interact in an interesting way to either understand better the dynamic in this region of the world where indeed we have very little data about. So Mary, please take the floor and go through your presentation.
Great. Okay, so can everyone see a scary creature on the screen now?
The red one, you mean? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Or beautiful, depending on what you think, so or what your preferences are. So yes, yeah, I'm Mary Wise, and I'm a professor of marine science at Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute at the World Maritime University in southern Sweden, in Malmö, Sweden. And yeah, today I'm going to talk about deep uncertainties in the ocean twilight zone, also called the mesopelagic zone. It's one of the most poorly understood ecosystems on our planet, but it provides essential ecosystem services that we need to be careful with. And I'll show you how we are trying to address the management and governance challenges there in the ocean twilight zone with the systems approach, and by incorporating information, knowledge coming from many different collaborators, and also decision-making under deep uncertainty approaches as best we're able to in this project, which is, and it's part of the MEESO Horizon 2020 project, which is coordinated by Vibjørn Mille from the Institute of Marine Research in Norway. So let's get on with it here. So, all right. So the ocean's twilight zone, or more formally, yeah, mesopelagic zone. It's around 200. It's found in the global oceans between 200 and 1,000 meters depth, and we call it the twilight zone because it is. There's just barely enough light that you can see, but it's still too dark for photosynthesis. And we know very little about the mesopelagic, but what we do know is for the most part shrouded in a lot of deep uncertainty. The mesopelagic, it's poorly understood. Many of you already know this because it's very difficult to study, as it's far from where the people are. It's deep. It's less accessible than shallower waters and where we fish or where we carry out a lot of our research. And it's very expensive to study there. It covers a vast area. Most of it is found in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and it changes a lot. There are a lot of dynamics, and it's complex, as I'll show you. The animals are also very good at avoiding nets. They avoid cameras and underwater vehicles, and they're also very fragile. Whenever they're brought to the surface, the scientists who are working with them experience that they turn to mush because they're accustomed to living under pressure. And so we've learned a lot, though, recently due to advances in acoustic technology, genetics, and other forms of marine observation technology. But this scientific work is still very much the beginning of a very long journey. Okay, so here's what we know. We know there's a lot of biomass in the ocean twilight zone. We know the estimates range from around 1 to 10 billion metric tons of biomass, but there's a lot of uncertainty in space and time in estimates. There's also, but we do know this is more than all capture fisheries combined, and it's the most biologically productive community that we know. But we don't know precisely how much. We don't know how this biomass is distributed in space and time. We also know it's full of biodiversity. So here's a picture that shows some of this, and these are wonderful photos from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and their Ocean Twilight Zone project. It's estimated that there are about at least 1 million undescribed species, but we're not sure where it's concentrated, how it's distributed in space and time. And there are questions that remain about the role that this biodiversity could play in ecosystems, the value that it has for society through technology and so on. Set my timer here. And we also know that marine science is trying to currently estimate how much biomass, where it's concentrated. We're trying to address questions about the seasonal patterns. Who eats it? How long do they live? What about fecundity? What about recruitment? How might climate change affect these systems? And are there other sorts of vulnerabilities? And we know that biomass is at least that we find in the mesopelagic. It's very, very important to many of the species that we're more familiar to most people and that we depend upon. We depend on them for fish and food the fish that we eat in Europe depend on the mesopelagic. Many of them do, as do those in the Pacific Islands. So, but how else do we depend on the ocean twilight zone? We know there are many linkages between the ocean twilight zone and whales, seabirds, turtles, tuna, sharks, because they're feeding on them. But again, we're still trying to understand these interconnections in the system. We also know that the ocean twilight zone is very, very important for the carbon it transports and sequesters while animals migrate up and down the water column each day. So it's been estimated, there are many different estimates about this, but that it's been estimated that our atmospheric carbon levels would be about 50% higher than they are now if it weren't for the migrations of the ocean twilight zone animals. They move up and down through the water column quite a lot. And when they do, they process and pull carbon away from the atmosphere into the depths. It's the largest animal migration on the planet. Not all the animals migrate, but many of them do. And when it gets dark, fish, squid, plankton, other organisms, they swim hundreds, even thousands of meters up the water column toward the surface where the nutrients are. And before the light comes out, they drop back down to the depth to avoid becoming food for something else, for those visual predators that are in the photic zone. Okay, but is the mesopelagic zone safe? Not necessarily, because this is the Anthropocene, and even the mesopelagic zone can be threatened by human impacts. The most pressing thing that we know about so far is deep sea mining. There's mining for sulfites, manganese, cobalt. These can result in toxic plumes that can reach the mesopelagic. There are concerns that deep sea mining for hydrocarbons, such as we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico, can cause problems for mesopelagic communities, and there are questions about how the Deepwater Horizon incident has affected them. But we don't know what these impacts could be. Other questions are, where are the interests for mining? What are the implications of international agreements, such as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, that could limit or influence where mining can take place in out in international waters. Food security, as we know, is a great concern to the growing population of people, and there's already a lot of growing awareness, of course, that land-based aquaculture, land-based food production systems and aquaculture is not necessarily going to get the job done. And so a lot of attention is turned toward aquaculture. The EU Commission has funded this research call that has funded the MEESO project to ask the question, can the ocean's twilight zone biomass sustainably feed the world via fish meal, for example? But of course, this raises many, many questions. So for example, there lanternfish is one of the groups of fish that are very plentiful in the mesopelagic and are being there's interest in harvesting them for fish meal. They're very plentiful, but lots of questions like how could we catch it? What about the new gear developments? What kind of new technology would we need to develop? How would we transport it? How do we make it more cost effective? Would it be safe for the human food chain? What about recruitment? What about fecundity of this group? How do they replace themselves? And also, how could we weigh today's benefits for harvest against the cost that it might cost future generations if we do this wrong and we disrupt the carbon cycle? Right. So now on to governance. How would we govern such a system? So most of the mesopelagic, as I mentioned, it's in areas beyond national jurisdiction. About 60% of the world's ocean area by depth is deep enough, about 60% of the world's ocean area is deep enough to have a mesopelagic zone. But of course, they're found in places that are where governance is a challenge. We're curious, what kind of policy levers are there? What about area-based management? Is it moratorium? Are they quotas? How could we manage such a potential resource? There are questions about ecosystem-based fisheries management options and the relationship that they have, that mesopelagic species have to higher trophic levels that we're fishing. There are also questions about should we consider more than fish and biomass when we set quotas? Should we be considering carbon sequestration when we're setting quotas, so-called MSY plus C approach? And also, what about, can we use climate and biodiversity policy to protect mesopelagic fish, for example? And what about science diplomacy? Can countries collaborate? This research is very expensive. To overcome these uncertainties is very expensive. Can countries collaborate together on the science to answer these questions? So here we are in the Miso Horizon 2020 project. We're trying to put the science first prior to any kind of exploitation so that we don't destroy our last undisturbed marine resource. And our project is going to run for another 18 months, and so here we're aiming to get a biophysical and social economic understanding of the mesopelagic. And we have different work packages that focus on different parts of uncertainties, whether they be from the natural sciences or the social sciences. In our group, we are responsible for the governance work package, and our work package is pulling a lot of this information coming from the different work packages, also from recent advances in the literature, in order to investigate whether decision-making under deep uncertainty tools can be used to make recommendations for the governance and management. One of the ways we're doing this is using a system dynamic model in order to support the decision-making under deep uncertainty analyses. Very briefly, what we're looking at is the interaction between ocean biological pump, mesopelagic ecology, the economics of harvesting, externalities of harvesting, governance with different kinds of policy levers such as quota, and then also the food demand for aquaculture feed and the need for and the demand for feed. Yeah. And this is just a bird's eye view of the structures that we have in the model. And again, this is in collaboration with WMU, the World Maritime University, and Delft's University. And so at WMU, we have Marcia Ostdijk, and then also Laura Elsler, and then also myself. And then at Delft's, we have Julie Vandeleen and William Mauping and Jan Kwakel. And so they're all involved in this. And so we're looking in this bird's eye view here. We can see things like fishing effort and costs, harvesting regulations, global carbon cycle, social cost of carbon, fish meal prices, and so on, and also mesopelagic ecology. And so we're pulling together as much as we can to look at this. And this here is a zoom in on the governance structures in the model. So we're looking at interactions between interest groups, perception of risks, harvesting quotas. This is in development. It's brand new, and this is so I'm very curious also how we're going to approach this. We're still trying to decide. And so some of the highly uncertain parts of the model so far, so these are the places that seem most sensitive to the range of values of parameters that we specify, things like aquaculture demand, the mesopelagic fishery development, carbon injection, sequestration, export, the biomass of the fish, of course, and then also different options for governance. And once we have tried some of these different model runs, we're going to use these DMDU approaches. This is my last slide. We're going to use a combination of participatory approaches. We're also going to use this with expert groups of stakeholders and panels. We're also going to identify scenarios through some quantitative approaches for scenario discovery, which we'll probably be hearing a little bit more in Stephen Popper's presentation a little bit later on. And so they're exploring uncertainty space, decision space, and then trying to find the sweet spot where the different objectives can be identified. and also try to find solutions that avoid the worst case scenarios that we want to avoid. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. Very interesting and fascinating topic. Of course, it's one of those topics where, of course, we have many more unknowns than sort of responses that we can give to the decision makers about what to do about this shared resource. And I was wondering if your system dynamic approach can account not only for, of course, the complexity of the system in terms of decision making, but also you mentioned the diversity as a challenge. But how is your tool able to address this diversity? I mean, you will have
the diversity of what
of the decision making process, and also of the different maybe objectives that they can have, or the different priorities.
Yeah, I mean, for some of these things, it depends on which uncertainties we're trying to deal with. So with some of these things, we might at best be able to just try to identify with our discussions with the stakeholder panels, what are the different options that we could consider, and also trying to look at just different high, low, medium, very simple sorts of approaches that we can parameterize and see how they play out in the models, and see how sensitive the results are to those. But again, it depends on which of the uncertainties we're thinking about.
And you can do that at kind of regional scale, so for different regions.
Yeah, I mean, well, right now we're looking at sort of the global scale with the approaches that we have now, and we may be able to zoom into the basin scale or the North Atlantic, and so and the kind of decisions we're considering are really big in those that would affect international policy. So things like closing the high seas to fishing. That would be an international decision. And so those are the things we're thinking about or trying to look at with this for now. But of course, these things are scalable. But when we're looking at the mesopelagic, there are a lot of uncertainties. Yeah.